big questions right away off the bat. You know, I know Kevin has gone through this before, but big questions off the bat. We hear about this all the time, Chris, or we hear about this all the time. Is this safe? I don't know what's going to happen with me with this fasting, or what is ketosis? What's going to happen when my body goes into it? I don't even know what that means. So there's a lot of steps, a lot of phases, a lot of criteria that folks just like, they hear it, all these new words, all the scientific terms, and then they just disconnect and they don't want to do it. So, you know, first things first, with the first question: what is fasting? What's intermittent fasting? As simple as we can explain it to our listeners.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you bringing attention to this because it's a very powerful tool for health and human optimization. And also, I mean, we work on the disease front management too. And I really appreciate that you're making it accessible to people.
Yeah, no problem.
So fasting in the most simplest terminology is not eating, right? And going intermittent fasting is selecting a predetermined amount of time where you abstain from food, and we call that time-restricted eating or time-restricted feeding. And the popular ways to do it would be to fast or not eat, although you can consume non-calorie containing beverages like tea, water, and even electrolyte drinks, and for an 18-hour period, and then, for example, eat within an 8-hour window. But that's just one example. There are many different versions of fasting. So there's time-restricted fasting, there's short-term fasting, and there's long-term fasting, which can be a very powerful tool for reestablishing your health. In millennia, it was used, Hippocrates talked about it, and it was even in the Bible. In the Gospel of Mark, talking about, fasting and seizures, so this is something, it's an ancient technique that's all throughout scripture and literature as a powerful tool for reestablishing health. So if someone wants to experience the benefits of fasting, it's accessible to everybody. It doesn't cost anything. It's safe. It is a very powerful tool. Also, intermittent fasting is to create a caloric deficit. So if you eat within an 8-hour window, for example, you stop eating at 6 p.m. with dinner, and then reestablish eating again by noon the next day. If you shorten that eating window, you inadvertently decrease the amount of calories that you consume without even trying. And a lot of people are trying to get control of their glucose levels. Type 2 diabetes is off the charts. Obesity, people are just overeating. So this is a simple tool without even changing your diet. So one way to go about doing this first is to eat whatever you're eating and start on a 12-hour rotation. 12 hours of fasting, pretty easy to do, right? You stop eating at 6 o'clock and then or 8 p.m. or something like that, and then you abstain from food until the next morning. And then you can push that to 14 hours of fasting, then 16, then 18 hours of fasting. And then you can also gradually transition to eating a more low carbohydrate diet in the process. So by eating low carbohydrate diet or a ketogenic diet, that actually makes fasting much easier because you have less fluctuations in glucose and also the hormones that will trigger cravings over time. So a simple way that your listeners can, start getting the benefits of fasting is just try very initially, if they're not doing it already, fasting for 12 hours and eating within a 12-hour window. And for the first week and the second week, they might start dropping sugar and starches from their diet and start eating a low carbohydrate diet during that 12-hour window. And then they can start pushing that to 14 hours of fasting and 10 hours of eating, right? And then eventually work to the community, and even research scientists have kind of settled on this 8-hour eating window and 16 hours of fasting. So the literature actually supports that this is a very powerful tool for, weight loss, not only weight loss, enhancing insulin sensitivity, reducing glycemic variability, stuff like that, and managing a lot of chronic disorders. So that would be a strategy that your listeners.
So you're saying basically during this intermittent fasting, so there's no, are they going to be experiencing any spikes in glucose? Like this blood sugar levels are going to spike up because the body's used to craving something
Yeah.
during that 12-hour time. So there's a little bit of challenges there that
There
they
is.
kind of, and definitely not any, definitely metabolic, but mental challenges that they have to go through within that, probably that first week through that 12-hour challenges.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain like some generalized challenges that they would probably have to face to go through this? This is dedicated, even the first challenge of it being about 12 hours is, I mean, you sleep, hopefully you sleep, 6, 7, 8 hours sleep. So it kind of eliminates some of those hours.
And
But
Chris, that brings up a great point, because I mean, I in the few fasts that I've done, I've actually gotten to a position where I think, I'm going to go out with a bang, and then I'm going to start my extended fast, and that first day is miserable. It's like almost like that craving, versus if I start that fast the night before with a more balanced meal or less carbohydrates, then it's a little bit easier that first day.
Mm-hmm. And, it's really important to mention that the more you do it, the easier it gets and the more benefits you derive from it over time. So your first fast is usually really hard for most people. We're all familiar, or most of your listeners are, with working out. You put 2 years of training behind your belt and you work up to like a 300-pound bench press, and you take 2 months off and you might be back down to 225, but you can get back up to 300 really quick, in a couple weeks. The same thing happens with your metabolism. So we're just starting to realize this now. So with muscle, we call it muscle memory.
I was about to say,
quickly get back to that prior level. When you train your body to be fat adapted, or to sort of transition to be able to more or less embrace this fasted state, the body essentially knows what to do. And what you're doing is you're opening up metabolic pathways that when you initiate another fast, those enzyme systems, those metabolic pathways have already been upregulated. And it actually comes back down to an epigenetic. When we talk about when we fast, we actually initiate or activate an epigenetic program, and the genes in our body are actually activated in a way that it upregulates the metabolic machinery that's associated with fasting. For example, maintaining blood glucose, hormonal control, ketone levels. All these things quickly become optimized once you do a couple fasts. So I think that's really important to recognize. I mean, we always knew this happened, but now experimentally we know why it's happening.
You see the proof.
Yeah. Yep.
So this leads me into the second question for you: ketosis or keto.
Yep.
All of this, all these short terms, and what does it mean? Like, I'm in the keto diet, or my body's going through ketogenesis, or I'm in ketosis right now. What triggers it? How to get to it? The benefits of ketosis? I know I'm throwing you a lot of questions.
Well, the benefits, most certainly. I mean, obviously we talk about fat loss and whatnot, but what are the other benefits? And we hear there are lots of other benefits and
we even know
disease
that
fighting.
Yeah, we even know that at a cellular level, things start to change for you in a regenerative process. And I think that's something that our listeners want to also know, is like, this is extremely beneficial for a lot of folks, and a lot of the research that you're doing supports that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So historically, this is actually the 100-year anniversary of the ketogenic diet.
Wow.
And
I did not know.
I did not know.
Yeah. So it's part of a big effort that I'm an editor for a book that'll be published in Oxford University Press with a lot of leading clinicians and scientists who have studied this. So it was developed at the Mayo Clinic and adapted, I think there's about 150 clinics across the United States that actually use the ketogenic diet for managing pediatric epilepsy and now adult epilepsy, and a wide range of what we call neurometabolic disorders, where impaired brain energy metabolism is essentially reversed or managed with this diet. And it's due to a number of reasons, but the brain has an incredible metabolic flexibility to be able to adapt from using glucose to using ketones as an energy source. Mm-hmm. And so the brain's like a hybrid engine, right? So it can use these two different fuel sources. It's not using one or the other when you go on a ketogenic diet, but what it is doing is using an alternative energy substrate in the form of these ketone bodies. And the ketogenic diet is different than any other diet because you can objectively measure the levels of ketones in your blood and in your breath. And I just demonstrated the BioSense breath acetone meter, which is an amazing device because you don't have to prick your finger, or even urine ketones. It's simple strips you can buy at any CVS or Walgreens. So these devices can allow us to quantify the state of ketosis that we're in. And when we are, for example, if we elevate our ketone levels to 1 millimolar, which you could do with any commercial device, you could buy at Walmart or online, a 1 millimolar concentration would be achieved by intermittent fasting after about 20 hours of fasting. You achieve that. And what that means is that's giving your brain about a 10% energy boost, right? Our blood glucose is about 5 millimolar, but if we add 1 millimolar of ketones, those ketones can directly pass the blood-brain barrier and actually enhance brain energy metabolism and help to restore energy metabolism in areas of the brain that are otherwise have compromised glucose metabolism. We call that glucose hypometabolism. Mm-hmm. And for things like Alzheimer's disease, it's a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease is glucose hypometabolism in the brain. So for Alzheimer's patients, for patients who have concussion, traumatic brain injury, Parkinson's disease, there are all, within the last few years, registered clinical trials to study the ketogenic diet and ketogenic agents like ketone salts or exogenous ketone supplements. So being in a state of ketosis can work therapeutically, but it offers significant advantages for the everyday person because when you're in a state of ketosis, your blood glucose is managed in a way where it completely abolishes or attenuates postprandial excursions in glucose, where you get a big spike in glucose and then it goes back down again. And I wear a device on the back of my arm here, which is a continuous glucose monitor. And I use a Levels Health app program that basically gives me a very detailed analysis of what the meals that I'm eating, what the foods that I'm eating, what my activity level, what my sleep is doing to my glucose levels. And that sort of biofeedback, or wearing this device, allows me to optimize my diet, my exercise, my behavior, meditation. Stress can really send my glucose levels through the roof. I didn't realize this until I started driving to work with aggressive drivers around you in Tampa was shooting up my glucose in ways that I did not understand.
Just here in Florida. That's it. Any other state, you're fine. Just when you come here, that's it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And I thought wild blueberries would give me a flat line, but it actually spikes my glucose. Organic, raw honey spikes my glucose, but I can eat a 2,000 calorie ketogenic meal and be like completely flat glucose. And that's because my system is sort of optimized for that. So the ketogenic diet is defined by a macronutrient ratio, right? For macronutrients, we have carbohydrates, we have protein, and we have lipids or fats. And a modified ketogenic diet is what many in the fitness community are using. And that's about 60 to 75% of the energy of the calories coming from fat, about 20 to 35% of the calories coming from protein. And then the rest would be carbohydrates, but only non-sugars, non-starch. So fibrous carbohydrates, essentially from things like vegetables and small amounts of fruits, nuts, avocados, salads, things like that. And that would sort of summarizes my diet. And following that diet has a lot of benefits, not only for disease management, but for energy levels, for recovery, for reducing inflammation. The jury's still out on how to apply this diet to specific athletes, whether they be strength athletes or performance athletes. There are ways to utilize the ketogenic diet, but also add carbohydrates back in. So you're not losing the benefits that carbohydrates can. So not all carbs are bad. And it all depends on the person. My wife, for example, has a very high carbohydrate tolerance and does pretty well on carbohydrates. But I think everybody can have benefits from a low-carb diet or even a ketogenic diet.
And now that's something that obviously your monitor helps you. Like you had mentioned, even the small changes in types of foods that you're eating, honey, blueberries, organic blueberries, spikes it. Yeah. Your wife, for instance, you had mentioned that she could eat a certain amount of carbs that you probably wouldn't be able to do. Yours would spike up and hers probably wouldn't it? So it's more along the lines, obviously, case by case. You also mentioned fitness and different types of sports. We both play basketball here and there. We had Kevin will probably tell you his basketball story while he was on intermittent fasting. But I guess my question is for you is that's the trick right now is the staying in ketosis and being in peak performance for certain sports. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's just all different depending on the type of sports that you want to do. But for the general population, it's the science is out. It should be fine for the most part.
And from the perspective of the energy level and the brain function, I feel once I get to that 24-hour, 28-hour mark for my fasting, it seems like you're sharper. It seems like your ability to focus. I know I've listened to a few of your podcasts that you've done with Rogan and Ferris and just talking about even the time extra that you have now because you're not sitting here eating all day and cleaning up and all that stuff. But I just was overwhelmed by like the energy and focus and the amount of sharpness that I have, once I hit those kind of levels. Do you also get that in intermittent fasting as well?
You do. And that's a great point that you bring up. And I kind of started transitioning with the ketogenic diet to intermittent fasting. It became popular about 2008 or 9. When I was just experimenting with the ketogenic diet and realized, wow, intermittent fasting becomes so much easier if you're adapted to a low-carb ketogenic diet. So I could, transition to, I was stuffing myself like 6 times a day, with a bodybuilder kind of diet, and thought I needed this to maintain like size and strength. But it was very liberating in that I could eat less. The energy density of a ketogenic diet is very high, right? Because the calories are coming from fat. You have 9 calories per gram as opposed to 4 calories per gram with carbohydrates and protein. But logistically, there was a major logistical advantage. And I think this has a lot of advantages for military personnel to not have to sugar bolus every 2 or 3 hours to maintain energy. Once your body is transitioned to burning fat as a fuel source, you have less cravings and you can function at a very high level when you talk about being more lucid and being more clear. And I think that has to do primarily is your digestive system has a break and your gut can get a lot of benefits from intermittent fasting because it can rest and repair. There's a lot of cell turnover that happens in the gut to repair itself. The gut, about 70% of your immune system's in your gut, right? And if you're constantly throwing meals at it, that's almost like something that it has to deal with. So it's like you're introducing the environment. Your gut is basically, you're exposed to the environment. And when you're eating food, your immune system is constantly working to detoxify various things that you're eating, neutralize things that could harm you. Many people don't realize this, but your gut needs time to repair. And when it's repairing and in a state of rest, more blood is directed into your bloodstream and can go to your brain. So when your gut is resting and your gut and your liver and all the associated organs take a lot of blood, a lot of energy, and a lot of resources to digest, assimilate, and break down food. And if you're fasting, you don't have to do that, right? So you have a lot of resources that are freed up that can propel blood, oxygen, and nutrients to your brain, to your muscles. So this is not something that I really thought about until I actually started doing it. And I had to figure out why this was happening. And these are essentially some of the reasons why, right? You're able to direct more energy, more resources after your body's in a state of rest.
So that kind of debunks some of the myths of like, I can't fast and work out, right? I mean, that comes, I think I was talking with you a little bit about that before and Chris kind of alluded to it. I was on an extended fast and I got extremely dizzy. I was playing basketball, 105 degree heat, 100% humidity, and I was drenched and I was just miserable. And I was like, all right, son, we got to go home. I rested for an hour, maybe even 2 hours, and it didn't get any better by drinking water. What was going on with me and why, how does that, I don't know. How do you fix something like that? If somebody says, hey, I'm crashing, I don't feel good. How do you kind of recover from that?
So this is, your body is going through a stress response. So it's probably a new metabolic state for your body. And your sympathetic nervous system was probably activated on top of stress hormones like cortisol And because you were outside sweating in 105-degree heat, you were losing a lot of electrolytes, and especially sodium. And when you're fasting, what happens is the hormone insulin becomes very low. And when your insulin's low, you tend to dump out a lot of sodium into the urine, and you could produce a state called hyponatremia. And if you're drinking water but not dumping in a lot of salt into your body, then your blood pressure goes down. And when your electrolytes are a little bit off, if magnesium is low, sodium, potassium, especially sodium actually, you can feel super crummy. And if you're not wearing like a continuous glucose monitor, you could be in a state of protracted hypoglycemia, and maybe where your brain's not getting enough energy. And because this might be a new thing to you, fasting, might be a shock to your body has not been adept enough or trained enough to produce robust amount of ketones. So the more you do a ketogenic diet, the more you fast, the better your liver is able to actually generate these ketone bodies that spill into the bloodstream and then prevent that energy gap that happens. So your brain is kind of going through glucose withdrawal, almost like if you a heavy coffee drinker and you stop, you're kind of going through that, and your brain is transitioning to a new energy source. And it takes a while for your liver to be able to ramp up that energy source to supply it to the brain. So like I said, sort of like, the more you do it, the better you get at doing it, and the more benefits your body. But I think it really comes down to, wearable technologies and software, like a CGM device I use the Levels app software, and it kind of gives me a continuous monitoring of my metabolism, where there are things that are happening that I otherwise would not be aware of, that I can make adjustments in my diet and my lifestyle to optimize metabolism.
Gosh,
and I really think that's the future.
Where we're going with these wearables is just incredible. Yeah. The future is very bright when it comes to nutrition and fitness and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Data is as important as anything now.
Yeah.
Everything. I want to actually, I'm very interested in a lot of the research that you're doing for, these degenerative diseases. We've mentioned, you mentioned a couple of one.
Epilepsy.
Yeah. We have Alzheimer's. You mentioned one. Cancer is the big one.
Cancer.
And I did some research on you about going into the ketogenic diet, about doing this pre-treatment for chemotherapy. Can you kind of explain where that's at? What are you doing? Because we do have a lot of listeners and listeners we don't know yet that are going to probably tune in and go, I'm going to go into chemotherapy. I maybe for the second round, the third round through, or the first round. They want to be in a position where it's very advantageous for them to have some benefits from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I gave a talk yesterday to the University of Florida. I actually have my slides printed out here. And prior to giving that talk, I jumped on clinicaltrials.gov, which is all the registered clinical trials. So 10 years ago, if I was to go on clinicaltrials.gov and type in ketogenic diet and then cancer, like nothing came up. And now you have about 30 clinical registered,
amazing,
multi-center clinical trials being done. So a lot of data is being generated right now. Most of them, about 90% or more of those trials, were using the ketogenic diet as an adjuvant to further enhance and augment a given therapy. So that could be chemo and radiation, either one or combined. And also now they're using the ketogenic diet to enhance immune-based therapies, which I think is very exciting. So we have spent quite a lot of time and effort studying ketone supplementation. And just a quick, if I do on keto, on clinicaltrials.gov, you had 79 studies right now with ketone supplements being done. And these are actually new to the market, and they can mimic the ketogenic diet. And then there's hundreds of ketogenic diet studies. And the list of things, there's a Parkinson's disease study. I was giving a lecture at University of Florida yesterday and realized that someone in the department had a registered clinical trial on Parkinson's disease. Epilepsy, of course, which has been used for 100 years, traumatic brain injury, concussion, a lot of rare metabolic disorders like glucose transporter type 1 deficiency syndrome. We study that in the lab. We have GLUT1D in mice. Alzheimer's, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, exercise performance. So you go on clinicaltrials.gov, there's about a dozen trials right now, either with the ketogenic diet or exogenous ketones on enhancing exercise performance, cardiovascular function, and an interesting one, alcohol withdrawal.
That is interesting.
So there's a group, studying exogenous ketones to help people wean themselves off of drug dependence.
Sure.
So this did not exist 5 years ago. So this is a rapidly emerging area of research, basic science research, and now clinical research. And I serve on a number of government panels. It's called study section. So you serve on these panels, and the government, Congress, basically directs funding towards certain areas. The Department of Defense, National Institutes of Health, and a lot of federal research dollars, taxpayers' dollars, are now being directed to ketogenic diet research and even ketone supplement research. And for me, that's very exciting because I was kind of the one that sort of initiated a lot of this stuff that's going on, and like years ago. Others were doing it at National Institutes of Health, at Oxford, prior to me, and it was looking at that research and asking, well, why is so little attention being put into these metabolic therapies? I consider the ketogenic diet a metabolic therapy, and I realize that you can't patent. You can patent various molecules that can be exogenous ketones, but the ketogenic diet was grossly underutilized in part because it was difficult to monetize it. And an oncologist, if they're prescribing the ketogenic diet, they would have to work with a registered dietitian.
I see.
And that's extra cost. Like doctors are not trained in nutrition. And if medicine really wants to make an impact on human health, there is no better lever to pull than nutrition. Nutrition is like by far, I teach at a medical college, and even on the curriculum development committee, and kind of stress this, but it's not tested on the boards. So very little nutrition gets into the curriculum, but everyone would agree that nutrition is probably the most important factor for human health and prevention of age-related chronic diseases, non-communicable diseases, which account for about 70 to 80% of the current healthcare costs. So
right. You're really moving the needle there, and it seems like the diseases, especially cancer and some of these, that, as our food supply has maybe deteriorated in preservatives and storage of grains and things over the years, the last 50, 60, 70 years, that also the curve of these degenerative diseases has gotten worse. Is that, in your opinion, is that what's going on?
Yeah, well, it's multifactorial, but a main contributor, I think, is the overconsumption of calories, in particular the overconsumption of calories from processed carbohydrates, which come from grains, and also the nature of the carbohydrate content and the molecules themselves of these grains being, genetically modified. I think the jury's still out on that, but I think we can all agree that the obesity problem, the type 2 diabetes problem, is due to an overconsumption of calories, and it is vastly easier to overconsume carbohydrate-based calories because they initiate a glucose and hormonal response that will trigger a feed-forward effect where we want to quench that craving of glucose with our glucose going up and down. So glycemic control is super important. So that's why I'm very excited to see technologies like a continuous glucose monitor and companies like, Levels Health moving the needle and getting this out into the public where people can get a basic understanding of what the nutrition is doing to the body. It's like, if I eat my normal diet and then eat a Pop-Tart, my glucose goes through the roof, and it's like only 200 calories as opposed to a well-balanced low-carb diet, which could be like 1,500 calories, and I have perfect glycemic control. And
it seems like that's a loop, right? It's like you get into that loop of the carbohydrates, and you crave more carbohydrates, and it's hard to get out. It's almost like a drug addiction. It's hard to get out of that loop.
Good point. Yeah, it's like a futile cycle, and that's. The more you feed that cycle, the harder it is to break out of that cycle. And the brain really becomes dependent upon the hormonal fluctuations, and it's also changing the neurotransmitter systems in a way. So dopamine, serotonin, your sympathetic to parasympathetic tone, like all these, stuff that we study in the lab. You are altering brain neuropharmacology in a way to be that sort of transitions your body to be dependent upon these nutrient fluctuations, which is it's feeding the reward systems in the brain. So you can look at things like the nucleus accumbens or the shell. I teach dopamine at the med school, and you can look at you can do an FDG PET scan and actually see areas, reduced activity in areas when you remove when you remove sugar from the diet in type 2 diabetes. Their dopamine levels plummet. Wow. And they're craving it. And then you initiate a glucose bolus with sugar or refined carbohydrates, and then you restore the dopamine.
I mean, it's probably even almost identical, and I've seen this before, identical to substance abuse with drugs and alcohol. The receptors and the triggers in the brain they mimic exactly the same, if not as close as possible to folks who have obese, obesity concerns, or just food cravings, with blood sugar levels, with grabbing carbs and eating carbs.
Similar.
Yeah, very, very similar. So that's something that, for our listeners need to be very aware of, is that it's a very major concern. It's a big thing.
And underappreciated. And I think, it's important to have tools available where people become aware of the choices that they're making. And I think, and also the community that you guys put together. I mean, having this online community, people ask me, like, what is the biggest factor? Like, how can we get people, even if they knew what to eat, how can you modify behavior to enhance compliance that they'll actually follow through with this? And I think, like, what you guys are doing is building a community of people where it almost runs itself. They start supporting other people through forums or online. And what I have found, I'm just speaking purely from a clinical perspective, is that things like Facebook groups, like there's a group called Type 1 Grit, which is Type 1 diabetics. And my student, now Dr. Andrew Kutnick, uses a low-carb diet to manage his type 1 diabetes. And so successful, he gave a TEDx talk.
Oh, wow.
So if you Google Andrew Kutnick, TEDx talk, type 1 diabetes, and it has helped so many type 1 diabetics. And you would have never, ever thought like a low-carb diet should be used for type 1 diabetes or even a ketogenic diet. But there's actually clinical trials on that now, looking at how this can be powerful. Because whenever you can use less insulin to manage type 1 diabetes, and that's exactly what low-carb diets are doing. So you manage your glucose levels without having to pump insulin, inject insulin.
So we talked a little bit about the obviously used in chemotherapy and degenerative diseases. What about the prevention? What is actually going on when you go into ketosis? And you're starving yourself of these carbohydrates. What's actually going on underneath that's helping to, I guess, keep these diseases at bay?
Yeah, I think, maybe just coming back to the cancer, because you guys brought that up, and why it's being used in clinical trials is, there's a lot of reasons why, but I think when you're on a ketogenic diet, you're reducing your blood glucose. And we know that the majority of cancer cells and tumors have a metabolic transition where they use preferentially much higher levels of glucose for growth of the tumor and also the general metabolism. And we call that the Warburg effect, right? Okay. So the ketogenic diet is targeting the Warburg effect by limiting glucose availability to the expanding tumor biomass and also suppressing the hormone insulin. That's actually how we make ketones. So by following a ketogenic diet, that lowers the hormone insulin. And when insulin is low, that augments and stimulates a fat burning process in the liver. And that accelerated fat burning process in the liver is actually what makes ketones. So it's important to understand that insulin, the hormone insulin, is what drives the growth and proliferation of cancer cells through a number of downstream pathways. So, and insulin too, if you have a lot of insulin, it basically opens the cells up to suck up a lot of glucose and those cancer cells will grow like crazy if insulin levels are high. So I think of the ketogenic diet as an insulin suppression therapy, and you have a lot of downstream pathways through the PI3 kinase pathways, mTOR, AMP kinase, all these things, that we can sort of focus on and study in the lab, are augmented in ways to marginalize or decrease cancer growth and proliferation. So you sort of weaken the cancer and make it a vulnerable target to other modalities. For example, if you lower glucose metabolism, there's something called the pentose phosphate pathway, and that allows the cancer cells to defend against various things through endogenous antioxidant systems. And if you cripple that with a metabolic therapy, then you make that cancer cell more vulnerable to therapies that kill the cancer cells through oxidative stress. So radiation does that, and many chemotherapeutic agents do that. So you're basically limiting the cancer's ability to defend itself against given therapy.
I can see that.
So so you could do it with fasting, you could do it with a well-formulated ketogenic diet, or the combination of the two, or even ketogenic agents that are being developed. So if you already had cancer, or you have a predisposition to cancer, or you just want to prevent cancer altogether, it is probably a wise decision to live in this state intermittently, or because it can, kind of coming back to your question, and we were talking about it before the podcast, there's something called autophagy.
Yeah, I always mess up that word.
Autophagy, so auto meaning self and phagy meaning eat. So autophagy is happening all the time. And when you're in a calorie deficit, autophagy is happening. So you don't necessarily have to do intermittent fasting or the ketogenic diet, but you certainly can augment it and enhance it if you fast for just 3 days, right? And we have not found an unambiguous way to quantify autophagy, I would say, because we're very interested in doing this in the lab and looking into it. But I would say that the hormones and various systems in the body, after about 3 days of fasting, I would predict that autophagy is maxed out after about 72 hours of fasting.
So there's no added benefit after 72 hours?
Well, the question, at about 48 hours, insulin bottoms out, glucose is very low and stable, ketone levels are elevated, and many of the downstream pathways are activated in a way that would, and it depends if you've been pigging out prior to, a 3-day fast. It may take you a little longer, but if you're entering a 3-day fast, from a low carb diet perspective or something, I think 3 days, a lot of the signals that we sort of associate with autophagy are kind of maxed out and are not, you can't really move the needle much farther after about 72 hours. So if someone wanted to sort of embrace fasting as a health maintenance or a cancer sort of preventative approach.
Taking out the trash.
Exactly. So you're making your immune system more vigilant at being able to identify and neutralize damaged cells that could potentially, or precancerous cells that could potentially transition into a cell population that could be a tumor, right? So, and even we have colleagues that study the ketogenic diet as a way to enhance cancer-associated immunity. So you're basically shifting and augmenting the production of various cells, natural killer cells that could seek out, identify, and neutralize cancer with a diet alone. But I think if one was to, and I don't like to make, prescriptions, but if from a personal standpoint, if you were to every quarter, every 3 months or so, if you were to fast 3 or 5 days and to get yourself into that physiological state, I think you would be doing your body a favor. And of course, seek medical attention, get blood work. Sure. Actually, these are things that I do. I get comprehensive blood work to make sure, liver function is good. So it is a stress to your body, but so is the standard American diet. So are many of the foods that we put in our diet. So fasting has been used for centuries. Many medical doctors will say this is very dangerous to do, to not eat for a couple of days, but the body sort of knows what to do. And it is like taking out the trash. I think that's a very good analogy, that you are making your body more resilient, metabolically resilient.
Interesting. You spoke of blood work. I had some blood work done after. I didn't intend to, but it just kind of lined up. I went to the physician for my annual checkup, and they did blood work on me. And she came back after my 80-hour fast and said your cholesterol is high. Is there a rationale? Is there a reason? Something going on behind the scenes that would cause something like that, or is that just an anomaly to me?
Do you know what your cholesterol was before the fast?
It's modestly high. It
Honestly,
wasn't.
huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of things are happening during a fast, right? So one of the things that you're doing is transporting a lot of, so the function of cholesterol, it's actually a lipoprotein, probably LDL, right? One of the functions of LDL is to transport, the cholesterol molecule. It's a lipoprotein, but it also transports things like phospholipids and fats, right? So that they're like little boats that kind of, so when you're in a state of fasting, you're mobilizing a lot of fat from adipose tissue. There's a lot of cell turnover. So you may actually be producing a state where you need more transporters to transport the fat because you're metabolizing that for energy. You're regenerating to a certain capacity. So that could be, this is not uncommon. So that could be happening. I talked to investigators yesterday, where when they fast their rats, they actually see an accumulation of fat in the liver, which I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting because we were going through some of our data. And so without feeding fat or even carbohydrates can usually cause a fatty liver. So this is a very natural thing to happen. So you're liberating a lot of fat from adipose tissue, and that fat is going to the liver and being broken down into ketones, but you start accumulating the fat in the liver. And it's not a pathological feature. It's just a feature of the physiological state that you're in. But your body would probably normalize itself. So I'd have to see the numbers, and you have to not just look at cholesterol, but you have to do a comprehensive lipid profile to really understand what were your triglycerides. So that's the most important number from my perspective.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to definitely do that next time I do that.
So a couple of more points here before we end. Immunotherapy. We're in a very unusual time. We already know we're in COVID-19, the pandemic, ketosis, intermittent fasting. Is this also has been done, or is this beneficial to help the immune system?
Great question.
Yeah.
So
you're getting into it now. You're doing the research. I know everybody's just like, okay, what do we need? Because this may not go away. Or there may be something like this again later. Yeah.
I'm going to use a simple analogy that just came to me just thinking about the immune system and health in general. So immunology is incredibly complex, right? When our immune system, think about it as like an army, right? And it's an army that we send out to attack things, right? And when we are eating a crap diet full of things, especially doing frequent feedings, that food goes into our gut, and a lot of our immune system is in our gut, right? Like maybe 78% of the immune system. So we're keeping our immune system very, very active and occupied. So we have an army, and we're sending 2/3 of that army to deal with the food that we're eating.
Constantly at war.
Yeah, to neutralize various chemicals, even like phytonutrients, like things we consider healthy, need to be detoxified. So our immune system plays a very big role. And a lot of time and energy, of the immune system is spent in the gut. So if we fix our nutrition and do things like intermittent fasting, we basically liberate a high percentage of that army to, flood our cells and our body and our circulation to do things other than dealing with the food that we're eating. So we then make our immune system more vigilant against potential pathogens if we follow proper nutrition. So I think proper nutrition combined with intermittent fasting is a great way to augment our immune system. And the ketogenic diet and the carnivore diet, I got actually a lengthy message. This is a multi-page message of a woman who just cured many of her conditions with like a keto carnivore diet. So a lot of people have these autoimmune disorders, and I have a tremendous amount of email feedback from people who have essentially cured their autoimmune disorders. I had eczema growing up, and I was plagued with eczema. It actually went into impetigo, which is like a skin infection, a staph infection, when I was younger a couple of times because it got irritated. a low carb diet and then eventually a ketogenic diet completely cured my eczema to where I never ever even had another episode for
That's incredible.
like 2 decades now, or a decade and a half. So I get a lot of feedback from people who have a wide range of autoimmune disorders, and a ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, or what they, using a carnivore diet has been remarkably effective when all other therapies they tried failed. So I think that's just one example of being able to enhance your immune system or to augment it in a way where you're not attacking your body. Whenever you're producing autoantibodies, I don't know of any situation where autoantibodies are a good thing.
Yeah.
And these dietary approaches like intermittent fasting, ketogenic diet will reduce the production of these autoantibodies that are attacking. And I think that's an underutilized area of medicine right now. And I think as science advances, we're going to start using more nutritional approaches to help people with this rapidly emerging area of autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, I mean, even as simple as the intermittent fasting keto, right? Mm-hmm. So with autoimmune, you're not, we're told take your vitamin C's, take your Flintstones vitamins, all that stuff, right? Drink your milk, whatever. That doesn't have to happen.
Yeah,
you just go into your intermittent fasting, just be careful about what is into your system. Yeah. That's free.
Yeah.
And so that obviously, like you said, will free up your body to do the things that it needs to do best in cases of diseases or sickness.
It's a huge lever. And I don't want to downplay exercise because that's key.
Yeah.
Fresh air, and then relationships, behavior, meditation, things like that. I mean, you can augment your immune system just by de-stressing with a variety of things. We're like really big about going out in nature at least for an hour a day. And I think that
fresh air and
like
sunshine.
Yeah, I mean, we live on a farm; it's pretty easy to do. But I think of all the levers to pull, I think nutrition and nutritional behavior, I guess, which you could be put under the umbrella of like intermittent fasting, and then wearable technologies, right? Like CGM devices, like the breath ketone meter I was showing you. It's giving me feedback that I otherwise would not have to optimize, to personally and we're all a unique metabolic entity, right? So genetically, we have different responses to meals, we have different responses to exercise, and I think technology will allow us to really hack and optimize these things for the benefits and actually show if a supplement's working or not, to lower blood glucose or to optimize this or that. So I really think that's the future. And I think I'm really excited about, wearables and about different types of ketogenic diets, and not only just the macronutrient ratios, but the types of fats and the types of foods and even functional carbohydrates that could be employed, with these kinds of diets to add benefit.
I got just one more kind of follow-up question was, this sounds really boring, and the food that you eat is just, I mean, it's like I'm boxing myself in, and I can't do this. Obviously this seems to have come a long way, and my wife and I made a ketogenic cheesecake the other day, for heaven's sake, and it was fantastic. You couldn't tell the difference. What's going on in the food world right now?
Yeah, very good point. So like 10 years ago, it definitely did not exist. 5 years ago, it started to emerge. A lot of entrepreneurs are scrambling to this space to develop low carb and ketogenic foods. So I have had the privilege to test ketogenic brownies, ketogenic ice cream, ketogenic this and that. And, I just posted, I think on Instagram, a comparison of 5 different types of ice creams. I did, Haagen-Dazs, Ben & Jerry's, Enlightened, Rebel, and Killer Creamery. So you have 3 low carb / ketogenic ice creams, and then you have sort of the staple. My wife loves Ben & Jerry's, and I like Haagen-Dazs, it's pretty good. And these ice creams have evolved to the point, they didn't 5 years ago, but they have evolved to the point where you can put them side by side and the taste is pretty similar. And the glycemic responses, actually I found ice cream itself is not very stimulating. Like it's not soup, it's not like a Pop-Tart. Right. So, and here we're at, Catapult here and it's a bunch of entrepreneurs, and we're working with a company, Yummy Foods, which is developing a line of low carb ketogenic foods like brownies and things that we're testing. And it's remarkable to see, just by changing some of the ingredients and eliminating things that could be problematic, like wheat flour and sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and replacing it with more natural ingredients. That's the science. And then the art is actually working on ways to make them hyper palatable, or in a way where, and even though these things taste, you can like direct them to taste very similar, they have a satiating effect because they don't spike your glucose, and they're typically higher in fiber. And then the fat content and sometimes the higher protein content has a satiating effect, not only in the gut, but in the brain. So I'm really excited that, food technology, and I'm a whole foods person. I love to eat whole foods, but there's a time and place to eat things like brownies and cookies and ice cream. I really enjoy having those snacks sometimes, not every day, but sometimes. And I think the market is emerging now, and we evaluate a lot of foods, and about 80% of the ones don't make the cut, but there's about 20% that do. And I like to highlight them sort of on social media and give these companies credit, because they're doing a lot of work to make food interesting, which is going to be really important for your listeners. And
I think we'll follow Dr. Dom in your various social media handles, that kind of thing.
Definitely.
Yeah, sure.
And his best brownie recipe.
Yeah.
That's so good.
I get that too.
I was like, he's talking about brownies and ice cream and food and stuff. He brings Joe Rogan some wine.
Right.
And I have
dry farm wines.
That's it. We were watching it.
Yeah.
And so apparently that wine keeps you in ketosis.
It
Right?
is.
Yeah.
It's Dry Farm Wines is a very unique company, and they source out all their wines from like mom and pop farms that don't use irrigations, hence the term Dry Farm Wines, and no pesticides or GMOs or anything like that. And all their wines have less than 1 gram of sugar per bottle. So on average, I've pretty much tried all of them, and they're basically non-glycemic, and they don't really affect my ketone levels up or down, and I can stay in a state of ketosis.
Did you hear that, everybody?
You can still drink alcohol.
Stay in ketosis.
Dry farm wines. I get this question every day. And people is like, I'm following ketogenic, but I'm very hesitant because I have to give up alcohol. No, you don't. There's there's companies that
it is, guys. The solution to all the world's problems.
Keep your stress low and your glycemic.
There it is. You can do all this and drink your alcohol at the same time.
One glass I basically limit. Sometimes I have 2, but on average just 1 glass with dinner every day.
1 big glass.
Yeah.
So we're almost out of time. What's next on your agenda? What are you working on next that you're starting something groundbreaking? Is there anything that you want to share with us?
Well, thank you for asking a lot of things. And I update ketonutrition.org website, so ketonutrition.org. There's a blog on there, some podcasts and research that we do. But I'm kind of parallel processing a whole bunch of things, but we have a lot of things going on in the lab right now, basic science research. We partner with people to do a number of clinical trials. At Duke University, there's a human clinical trial on oxygen toxicity. And we are really excited to continue our partnership, with NASA, hopefully to do more space analog missions on NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations. Obviously things were delayed because of COVID-19, but we have a lot of things going on there. And I love to do personal testing, so I'm like a walking experiment, and I'm having so much fun just evaluating new technologies like Levels Health or the Biosense breath acetone meter, and also different foods. So I'm excited in the lab, outside the lab, every day.
This is your life.
It is.
You're researching.
I can't ask for anything more. I feel fortunate.
Your Instagram, social media, what is, where can we find you?
I kind of forget. I think Dominic D'Agostino KT would be Instagram. And then your website
Facebook, again, right?
Yeah, I think if you just kind of Google my name, Facebook or something like that, it should start to come up. Over the years, it's grown a lot of followers, and that's a testament to the popularity of the ketogenic diet, because, I don't necessarily, post exciting things, but people are just so hungry, pun intended, for ketogenic diet information. because I really do get emails every day from people saying this saved my life. This changed our whole family. Like I started doing it, then my family and my kids adopted this approach, and we've eliminated a lot of the sugars, and now their grades are coming back. They're doing better in school. And yeah, I get a lot of parents email me that they just eliminated like crap food and sugar, and it's really affecting their grades and performance in sports and things like that. So
we were made for so much more.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's super fantastic, guys. Dr. Dom, thank you.
Thanks for having
for
me.
joining us here. I know a lot of our listeners have probably learned much more than they bargained for. So they got a good amount of information here. Thanks, Kevin, for being here. Okay, Yes.Fit fam, that is it for our podcast with Dr. Dom today for the Guide to Fasting and Ketosis. Stick around. We have much more content coming your way here at Yes.Fit. So thank you guys for listening.